All right. Hello, everyone. I am here. I was out running some errands earlier. Well, I was out watching the Michigan football game earlier at a Buffalo Wild Wings, and I made a stop afterwards and got a little hung up there. I'll just say that, and uh, got slightly delayed. Give me a second here. I'm going to share. Um, I'm going to make an announcement over on my original channel that I'm live here and I'm having this talk here. So give me 1 second. Please bear with me. Let's see. Yeah, let me share this. Let's see. Discussion. As I said before, when I first came to YouTube, there were some content creators. One is, I'll just say Tommy. I think most of you know who Tommy is. And if you don't know who Tommy is, that's okay. But I never, he would always start off his live streams typing something, and I didn't realize that he was making an announcement on his other platforms that he was going live. So let me switch this over, and then I will start. I have a very special guest today. Okay, there we are. I can see myself here on StreamYard, and I can see myself over on YouTube now because StreamYard broadcasts to YouTube. Okay, Snuggles is here, the first one with eyeballs, and he says, I would like to see you do some more collabs with other YouTubers because it's sad that you do not have more people watching you. This information you are teaching me to get out work on the people. Okay, yeah. Well, Snuggles. First of all, let me give my official greeting here. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. And this is Big Discussions 76 Science and Technology. And a really cool thing happened this week. This channel crossed over the 1,000 subscriber threshold. And I want to thank everyone who helped get the channel here. And I want to thank everyone. I want to give a early thank you who helped to everyone. Let me start that over. I want to give an early thank you to everyone who will help get the channel beyond this mark. I especially want to thank BGS, Nicole, and Ron Wills. Ron Wills, I interviewed him over on my original channel on Wednesday night. And when I told him that this channel was hanging right around 954, he said, you know what, this is important stuff that you're doing. So I'm going to make a commitment to get you those other 45 or 44 subs that you need, starting with me. And that's what happened. He subbed. And then the next day I was working, and I watched the number slowly tick up, and we are beyond 1,000. So I think that this is just going to continue to grow and expand, because now this channel is going to have a community tab, which means that I'll be able to share information even when I haven't uploaded a pre-recorded video, or even when I haven't gone live. I'll be able to share articles. I'll be able to share diagrams, and I'll be able to communicate information that the YouTube algorithm might not like. And as you know, this channel got taken down initially in July for talking about a couple of things that YouTube is highly policing right now. YouTube was gracious enough to put this channel back up, so I didn't lose all of my data or my subscribers. But yeah, I expect this to keep growing and growing and growing, especially now that I have a community tab. So, guys, I have a special guest today. And one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of growing the channel is that you guys know, or maybe you don't know, that I have a background in the biomedical sciences. So my backgrounds are in pharmacology and toxicology. So I know those fields, and I know things associated with those fields like drug metabolism and inhalation toxicology. But the STEM acronym is actually very, very broad. It's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I don't want to restrict this channel to solely to what I know. I want to bring in other minds and other scientists and other specialists in all 4 of these acronyms to talk to them and to talk about their expertises and to talk about their fields and those kinds of things. So look for more of what I'm doing today. So with that said, I'm going to bring up my guest, and my guest, I've been wanting to have him for a while now. This is someone I highly respect. This is someone I've collabed with in some very unique and special ways. And so I want to welcome to my platform for the very first time, hopefully not the last, Dr. Vernon Morris. Vernon, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for inviting me here. It's good to see you again. It's good that I'm seeing you again recently. You know, you visited the Southwest and took some time to come by and hang out a little bit and meet meet a little nephew.
Yep. That's right.
So yeah, it's good to see you. And congratulations on the reaching the subscriber threshold.
Thank you. Yeah, YouTubing, man. It's it's been probably about a 2.5-year journey for me, and there are a lot of things that go into being a YouTuber. Part of it is, you have to have something to talk about. You want to try to catch the algorithm, quote unquote, and you want to try to draw traffic to your channel organically. But a large part of this is also networking. So there have been people who have shepherded me in and told their followers, you should come and listen to this guy. And I think that what I'm doing here is very, very necessary, especially for individuals with backgrounds like ours, because there just aren't a lot of us. So I think that, this visibility is important. Us talking about these topics visibly is important, because I think the imaging and messaging matter. So,
no doubt.
Okay, so I have there's a greeting here from Giyagami. Giyagami says, "Greetings, Dr. Dunbar. No super chat in the text bar." No, Giyagami. It takes once the channel crosses. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes with Google, but it takes a couple of days for your super chat to become enabled. And then it takes about a week for your community tab to show up. So all those things are booting up behind the scenes right now. But if you want to make a donation to the channel, if you're watching this live or on the playback, that information is right here. So this is my Cash App and my PayPal. So in the meantime, even after the super chat becomes enabled, you guys can donate to the channel that way. It's up to you, but some people like to super chat their comments. So guys, I have some questions for Dr. Morris. His time is valuable. So I don't want to keep him here for hours and hours. Of course, I could ask him questions for hours and hours and learn some things, but I have some questions for him. But before we jump into that, most of you know, and if you don't know, before I was YouTubing, I was writing, and I wrote for Examiner.com, and I started my own blogging platform when Examiner.com showed up. So one of the people I interviewed via print was Dr. Morris. So below this live stream, or if you're watching on the playback, I posted the links for my blogging platform to my print interviews with Dr. Morris. So,
like a kid over there.
So in these interviews, I was thinking earlier, I remember us sitting on the phone, I recorded it, and then I transcribed it. And that took a while because you and I talked for about an hour and a half.
Oh yeah.
So that took some time. But everyone, so if you want to read these, we go into depth about how he got started in science, his mentors, and some of these things we're going to touch upon a little bit today. But the background, if you want to learn about his path, that's here. And also, that's part one. This is a two-parter. Part two, and I think we're going to touch upon a little bit of this today. We talk about some of Vernon's efforts when he was in the DC area to get science into inner city schools, into the DC schools. And I thought that was very important work. And there were times when I came and helped out. And I thought that it was important for me to use my platforms to try to get more coverage for this. So that's there. As you'll see, I'm going to say this, then we're going to start the interview. But mentoring and imaging is important. And if you read this, you'll see that he had individuals who kind of made recommendations to him and opened the door for him to go in a certain direction, just like I had individuals on my path who recognized my talent and my aptitude for science and recommended that I go down certain avenues to pursue a career in science. So the mentoring, especially for individuals from backgrounds like ours, the mentoring and those things are very, very important. So these links are below in case you want to take a look at them. If you read them, please leave comments on the blogging platform itself. So I'm going to stop the screen share. Okay, everyone, give me 1 second here. I have an even more recent article about Dr. Morris. Let's see, I'll enable my screen share. Chrome. There it is. Let me close that box. Okay, so I'm going to throw this in the chat, and I will put this below the playback for the stream as well, so anyone who wants to read it can read it. But this is an article. This is entitled "A Change in the Air: Atmospheric Science is Overwhelmingly White. These Black scientists ignited a change." Okay. So Vernon, you want to just give us a few words about what's being
this
said
one? Yeah, this one, I think it came out this year. It was sort of interrupted by the pandemic, but it's a story about one of the programs that I helped start at Howard University in atmospheric sciences and what its impact has been over the last 20 years in a field. So you alluded to this earlier in your opening comments that the STEM fields are tragically underrepresented in Black and Native American and Latinx, Chicano, certain Asian Pacific Islander scientists or individuals who identify with those ethnicities and backgrounds are largely excluded from STEM fields. And so one of the challenges that I took on as an academic was to try to change that in my own sort of sector or slice of the academy. And we've had, I think, significant success. And this article by Science highlights that and goes into some of the details of the history of that. So, and it may provide a little more context to some of the things that we may discuss today as well. So,
Okay.
So,
Everyone, I just dropped the link in the chat if you want to save it for your own records, and I'm going to put that link beneath the playback for this stream. So let me stop the screen share, and we'll jump in. And I have a few questions for you, Vernon, and let's just see where this goes.
mm-hmm.
So we met a couple of years ago. I think it was at the Nobuche conference. Nobuche, for those of you who don't know, that stands for the National Organization for Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. My background my backgrounds are in pharmacology and toxicology. So there's chemistry all within those fields, but I wasn't a part of Nobuche per se, but I was encouraged to get active in the local chapter, and I did for a little while. And I attended a conference, and there you won the Henry McVeigh Award. In the interview, I said it was the Percy Julian, but you corrected me, said no, I think it was Henry McVeigh. Yeah. And at that point, that's when we met, and I started to see that you were active in trying to get science into the DC schools.
Yeah,
and so I wanted to ask you, well, before I ask you that, everyone, if you haven't watched it, you should get a copy of Forgotten Genius, which is a biography of Percy Julian. And one of the things that Vernon told me in our interview, which is below the stream, is that you said that was mandatory viewing for chemistry students at Howard, right?
Yeah, at that time, I think I was chair back then. But yeah, that movie had come out in sort of the mid 2008 to 2010 timeframe, I believe. It's been out for a while now, at least 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so Percy Julian designed the chemistry building at Howard University. So a lot of our chemistry majors were not aware of that. A lot of people aren't aware of that. That building design, it's 5 floors of, at the time, really advanced science design. Was designed by the leading chemists in the United States, who happened to be an African-American, Percy Julian. It is the only science building in the nation that was commissioned by a sitting president. Franklin Roosevelt came and commissioned the building. So that is sort of this forgotten, piece of history in terms of science and chemistry and the university itself, that we wanted to get into our major's portfolio, to know that the building that you're in, regardless of its state at the particular time, is actually a highly historic building in a number of ways. This is the first millionaire chemist, Black chemist in the nation. The company that he started is now, I think, GlaxoSmithKline, still a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a brother, it's just a brilliant chemist, but a very down-to-earth person when you read his worldview in his own words and get a chance to learn about his life. So it's a nice documentary, well acted, well produced, and we wanted to make sure at that time, at least, I don't think it's now mandatory any longer, but make sure at that time that was part of the experience in Howard chemistry.
Okay, I'm going to show everyone, because his name, to my recollection, never came up at my HBCU. I wouldn't have expected his name to come up at the University of Michigan, but he's not. I'm sorry. This is the wrong. This is the wrong link. It's a name that should be talked about more during Black History Month and throughout the year. And when I watched the documentary, I realized that part of my scientific journey was just realizing that you have to do experiments oftentimes over and over and over again. And there's a process of troubleshooting, and there's a process of experiments not working in order to get to the experiments that will work.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched Forgotten Genius, I saw it and I realized, okay, that was just part of the process. That was just part of the nature of the beast. It wasn't me, it was the science. But the trick is you got to stay in there. You got to apply yourself, but you have to continue trying things. And that's one of the things that I saw there. And here was a man like us, a Black man like us, who had done this, but I just didn't know about it. And I think for my personal journey, that would have helped me out to know about that even before I went through my scientific training.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And this is, we'll get to the public schools and public education. I think public education does a horrific job of showing the diversity of the contributions to science and the loss or the absence or erasure of Percy Julian from the broad literature on chemistry and chemical advances in the United States is an example of that. It's always dead white guys' greatest hits,
Yeah.
And maybe you throw in Madame Curie. Okay, there's one white woman. But beyond that, in chemistry, or if you go to physics, or if you go to mathematics, or what have you, it's as if nobody of color had the capacity or ability to contribute in a meaningful way. And that's, like I said, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for science.
Yeah.
So
I'll probably leave this link below as well. I'm going to read some of these comments, and then we'll move on. Vernon, Chris, thank you for being here. Always good to see you. Shonda, good to see you as well. Engineering Cannabis says, "Good day, Dr. Vernon. Are you into forecasting and creating predictive models for climate change and weather conditions?"
Yes, we can get to talking about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shonda says, "That's amazing. That's an amazing story, Dr. Morris. I'm not sure of the numbers now, but around the early 2000s, there were around 300 or so African-American chemists in the United States." Okay. Did you want to say something about that, or?
Well, it depends on what level you're saying for chemists. So it's definitely a lot more now. But if you're talking about at a BS level, a master's level, or the PhD level, certainly those numbers are significantly higher. Now, where are they? You don't have 300 Black faculty in chemistry in the academy out of 11,000 institutions, and that's sad. So there's underrepresentation, there's still exclusion, but there certainly has been progress in producing Black chemists.
Okay.
But thanks. Good point.
So the science festivals you would hold in the DC public schools, what was science like in those districts? Because or in a district like that, because I only came a handful of times. And are the DC schools, to your knowledge, a microcosm of inner city schools across the United States?
I mean, I'd say to my knowledge, in terms of the reflection of the number of certified science teachers and the general lack of those, yes. A lot of the urban public schools don't have degreed physicists teaching physics or degreed chemists teaching chemistry most of the time. A lot of the schools right now are sort of heavily subscribed by programs that I think have value. Teach for America and some of the programs that are supplying folks straight out of college or doing their gap year, a couple of years teaching, but they tend to be transient in the schools. And so long-term teachers with science backgrounds who've performed science, teaching science in the schools is rare. And quite often you've got schools that don't teach the full suite of science or teach in such a way that is not preparing the students to do well or perform competitively at the next level. And then that was, that. And again, I think the lack of role models was one of the inspirations for us to say, look, we're in DC. Howard University sits inside of Washington, DC. And our relationships to the public school system were pretty tenuous at that time. I think they had been better at another era before I got to Howard. But in terms of how, the chemistry department exchanged and interacted with DC public schools and the physics department and the mathematics department, the biology department, the way that we interacted was very limited. And we weren't really addressing where some of the gaps were in terms of expertise. And so, we thought it was easy enough to do a couple of things. One is put together that traveling science show where we would not say, you have to come to Howard to see where the scientists are. We're going to come to your neighborhoods and we're going to do it for free and we're going to do it on request. And you tell us what you need. What lessons are you trying to teach? What experiments would you like to do, etc. So we basically set up a service where a school could contact us and say, I've got 5th and 6th graders. We'd like to understand magnetism. And, we'd go do a site survey to find out, how much power is there? What can we bring into the space? Is there ventilation? X, Y, Z. And we would design, okay, this is what we're going to do in your space. And then, gather the expertise from the students and faculty and colleagues who, Washington, D.C. is rich in African-American expertise in the sciences and engineering. And so we would, as bring in a big group, set up, and then run experiments. And part of it was the teaching and, relaying scientific knowledge. And the other part was just showing students, no, this is stuff you can do. This is stuff people like you do all the time, every day for their jobs, and enjoy it. This is an enjoyable thing to do. And try to get that out to as many schools as possible. We went to churches, did it in churches. We did it in civic, community centers. Any DC Boys and Girls Club, we did it. Anybody who wanted to bring science into their community, we did. We call it the Community Science Fest. But that's what we did for about 10, 12 years. And I hope it still goes on. We left a legacy. There's still some folks at Howard who are committed to, Miles Holloman is deeply embedded in Truxton Circle, Shaw community. I think is going to continue to carry that flag and make sure that there's still socially embedded science opportunities in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Speaking of Miles, let me just throw this up.
Miles.
Give Miles some shine here. Let's see. It gets in part 2. That's part 1. Let me stop that.
Yeah, Miles was my partner in crime, basically from the start. Miles is lab technician at Howard University, DC native, and hosts. There's a Florida Avenue. There's a Florida Avenue event that happens every fall. So anyone listening from DC or tuning in from DC, or if you're going to be in, there he is, going to be in DC in the fall, you go down to Florida Avenue Park. It's after Labor Day, a couple of weeks, typically about 2 weeks after Labor Day. Actually, it might be, could be going on today for all I know. But typically it's around this time of year. There's free food, music, games, science, and just like a community engagement down there that's really nice. We've been doing it for the last couple of years. COVID knocked it out last year, I think. I'm not sure what the plans are this year, right now. So it may not be going on now that I think about the context. Sometimes I forget we're in a global pandemic. But it will rise again, and it's a wonderful event. for the community to come out and support science and student engagement in science and community engagement in science and with scientists.
Okay. This picture right here, this is Miles. Those kids are probably in college right now, years ago. But yeah, it's just, it's remarkable that they were able to take time from, I'm certain you guys had other things to do, but they took time to go out into the community or bring kids in on campus to show them, science demonstrations and experiments and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So speaking of other things to do, let's transition over into the research you were conducting when you were at Howard. And I don't know how much you're doing now since you're in a new capacity, but talk to us a little bit about what you were doing there. I know you were going out to sea and doing some atmospheric research. And I wanted to ask this question because this is an area, there are whole communities of people who don't even know what this is. So can you talk to us about the research you did at Howard?
Sure. And I think someone asked about numerical weather and climate forecasting models. So I'll try to address some of that, a response to that question a little bit in this. But so my background is chemistry and math undergrad, and I got my PhD in geophysical sciences, which is pretty broad descriptor, but basically Earth sciences. And my focus was on the atmosphere. So the Earth system has, the hydrosphere, the liquid phase elements of the Earth, the oceans, the lakes, the rivers, streams, marshes. It has the solid Earth, which starts at the surface, goes down to the core, and then it has the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so I studied the atmosphere and how it couples to the solid Earth, and of course you have the anthrosphere for those of you who are paying attention, because you've got, and the biosphere, so you've got humans that some people section away from the biosphere, the living part of or segment of the Earth system. But humans are part of the biosphere, but they also influence the biosphere in really unique ways and influence all the spheres in unique ways, often detrimental to their own survival, our own survival. But I study the atmosphere. And so what I do is I bring to bear knowledge and techniques from physics, from chemistry, from biology, from mathematics and engineering to understand, for me, how the chemical composition of the atmosphere influences a variety of processes. And for me in particular, air quality, health, food security, and climate. So the research that I did at Howard revolved around looking at how atmospheric chemistry drives certain processes in urban areas like Washington, D.C., but also African megacities and some tropical megacities in the Southeast Asia. And looked at how airborne particulate, we call aerosols sometimes, or PM, you hear PM10 and PM2.5, it's particulate matter, how particulate matter, the chemistry of particulate matter evolves as it moves around in the atmosphere, and then there are magnifying effects of those chemical processes. And one of the focuses was looking at Saharan dust storms. And the reason we look at Saharan dust storms is that a single Saharan dust storm puts a couple of tons of particulate into the atmosphere. It doesn't just drop back down in the desert. It actually moves around the planet. And very recently, the last couple of years, some of the larger storms have caught national attention or international attention because, you deposited dust on the French Alps, or dust from Africa has reached California or Texas, or you've got these beautiful satellite images that you see it circulating the planet or half the globe. But I started studying these storms about 25 years ago, when there was very little interest in the public about the storms, because we had the idea that at that time that the dust was doing more than just blocking radiation, and it was doing more than just rising up in the atmosphere, getting transported a little ways, and then falling back down, and that's the end of the story. That there were these really long-term climate impacts of dust, and moreover, climate's a long-term impact. There were actually these intermediate impacts on timescales of life cycles, of crop cycles, of biological processing in the ocean. And so for us to really understand or test that hypothesis, you had to go out and follow the dust along its trajectory from Africa to the eastern seaboard, or to the Caribbean, or to South America. And at that time, no one had done that. In fact, no one had proposed to do that. People were more fixated on, okay, if the dust gets to the Caribbean, we can set up a sampler in the Caribbean and wait for the dust to reach it, and we'll collect the dust and we'll analyze those things. And you can get information there, but you don't get evolutionary information. You don't get information on what did it start like, and then how did it evolve, at what rate did it evolve, and then what were the feedbacks in the atmosphere as it moved along. You don't get information on how far up into the atmosphere it moves. You don't get information on what gets deposited into the ocean, right? And one of the things that we're looking at right now, because I continue this work, is that the particles actually have a biological profile. There are microbial communities that live on the particles. And when they get transported, a number of things happen, but essentially the environment that they're in when they're on the ground in the Saharan desert is very different from the atmospheric environment, and often different from where they get deposited. As those environments change, the microbial communities respond. And so what may be dormant in the soil in Mali can get activated as it moves across the tropical Atlantic Ocean in the atmosphere. And then by the time it deposits in Costa Rica or Brazil or Florida, you've got a different microbial community that might be highly active, might be pathogenic, quite often represents food security challenges. And if we are blind to that, not looking at it, we're not going to be able to respond to it. And so what we've been able to do is characterize a number of processes that happen on the surfaces of the dust that allow us to put that into numerical forecast models. And so coming back, I forgot who asked the question, but coming back to the climate and weather forecast models, we've been able to change several what we call physical parameterizations in the global forecast system for NOAA based on our observations of Saharan dust that have led to improved hurricane forecasts, for example, that have led to improved climate forecasts in particular. And so in shorthand, my research involves taking measurements in the environment, developing models based on those measurements, and then taking those small models of those microprocesses and putting them into larger scale models that allow us to predict climate better, predict weather better, and actually ecological forecasts.
Okay. All right. All right. First, I want to thank Chris for the Cash App. Thank you very much. Everyone else, donations are welcome, especially if you're enjoying this. I'm learning something listening to Dr. Morris discuss his research. And again, I want to have more discussions on this channel because STEM is broad. My background is in the biomedical sciences, but there's a lot out there. The dust storms, are those natural, or have those picked up for man-made reasons, or what's your take on that?
So that is yes and yes. Okay. So you will get, because of where deserts are situated globally, you get changes in wind patterns, and you can get dust storms locally. So in any desert, there are dust storms. Here in Phoenix, in the U.S. Southwest, we get dust storms that come from the Sonoran Desert, that come from any of the high deserts down here, that come from the Samoyucan Desert, Mojave Desert, etc. So if you've got loose soil on the ground, it can get swept up into the atmosphere and carried. And deserts are man-made. Deserts are can naturally form and do form as the Earth system evolves. But you can also get desertification or expand deserts based on human activity. Mm-hmm. And so the Saharan Desert is expanding. There's desertification that has happened even on the time cycles of the United States, with the great dust storms in the Midwest in the 30s. If you degrade the soil enough, you're going to get a lot of mobile surface soil, and you'll be able to liberate that soil swept up into the atmosphere, into dust storms. And so, yeah, it's a great picture of North Africa. And you can almost see a strict sort of dividing line of green that goes right to a very bright reflective surface that's difficult to distinguish from Saudi Arabia, which we all conceive of as being, highly desert and sand and so forth. This looks sort of monolithic and homogeneous, but in fact, the chemical composition of the desert soils changes really dramatically as you move from north to south and from west to east. And so we can actually look at chemical profiles of dust, and to some extent microbial profiles, and say, no, this came from this part of the Saharan Desert. And the Saharan Desert is balkanized into different regions. There's a lot of topography there. There's a lot of rich geochemistry and geomorphology. And so it's a very diverse region when it comes to the physics of the soils, whether it's clay or silt. And I'm trying to stay at a reasonable level, but
okay, go for it.
Yeah. But you have different, your deserts can be salts, they can be silts, they can be clays, they can be silicates. And so each of those chemical classes, each of those are a different type of soil type, different type of water content, different dielectric, different physical properties, and different chemistries. And so they respond differently as they get transported through the atmosphere. Their processing due to radiation is different. Their processing due to chemistry is different. Their microbial communities are different. And their size distributions are different. And so that leads to a number of effects that if you were to assume everything had the same chemistry, or that everything was chemically inert, or that there was no biology, and you put that into a model, you get errors. You get errors on short time scales, you get errors on large time scales. It's very difficult to predict precipitation. It's very difficult to predict the thermodynamics of an air mass if you're not taking into account the physical properties of the particles in that air mass. And so that refining those based on measurement helps us predict, oh, there's a hurricane that's going to form in the middle Atlantic 2 days from now. I mean, if you think about that, that's a pretty powerful model to look out across our global atmosphere and pinpoint to within a few tens of kilometers, something is going to happen there 48 hours from now that will then come across, 10,000 more kilometers and make landfall in Florida or in Texas or in Campeche or wherever. We have that capacity because of the types of measurements that we take and the types of models that we develop from those measurements. And so that's I get excited about doing this type of research because I know that there are benefits on the back end, even though it looks, it may sound a little bit crazy to say, yeah, I chase dust storms across the Atlantic Ocean. If someone said, say it in one sentence, that's kind of what I do. I chase dust. I chase Sahara and dust across the Atlantic Ocean. But there's some pretty powerful impacts of that.
It's surprising that microbes can travel from one continent to another. I mean, I wouldn't think that life forms, I mean, through the elements, you can put, African bees in a cage or something like that and take them to North America. But I wouldn't think that microbes could travel in the atmosphere from one continent to the other.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And, fungi are particularly robust. So fungal spores and so fungi, their transport is really effective. But there's evidence and there's theories that microbes can get deposited into planetary atmospheres from above. There's the panspermia hypothesis that says that some of the initial microbes that seeded life forms on the Earth were deposited here from comets hitting the upper atmosphere and then basically raining down onto the surface. I'm actually working on a proposal to examine what microbial life is in our upper atmosphere, in the near space sort of region of our atmosphere. But yeah, microbes are incredibly diverse and robust in ways that we're just beginning to understand. There's a lot of extremophiles, things that live in volcanoes, things that live at the bottom of the ocean where the pressures, crush anything that we know of. There are organisms down there that are swimming around, eating and doing things. And so, in the Dead Sea, there are microbes living, there's life everywhere. And so, for us one of the things that we know very little about is life in the atmosphere. We just haven't asked those questions. And I think as we've begun to ask those questions over the last 10 or so years, we're finding that there is life in the atmosphere. And in fact, it has significant influences on, macroscopic phenomena like cloud formation, for example. Mm-hmm. It turns out that airborne microbes, when they metabolize, there's certain enzymes that they express are 1,000 times more effective in seeding clouds than sea salt, which we think is the easiest thing to seed clouds with. When we go out and do cloud seeding or cloud modification exercises, you may use sodium iodide or something like that, potassium iodide, but you use salts. There are microbes that are 1,000 times more effective than those that we're just discovering.
So Vernon, what does that mean, cloud seeding?
So a cloud can't form without a particle.
Okay.
A nucleus. And so that nucleus, in effect, seeds the cloud. Now that you have a surface, water can condense on that surface or ice can condense on that surface, but in such a way that that droplet or that ice crystal stays suspended in the atmosphere. And it stays suspended as an aggregate of many particles that are there. And so when we look up and see a cloud, that cloud is basically a collection of millions, billions of droplets that have condensed onto particles that are at that level. And sometimes it's ice, sometimes it's water, sometimes it's a combination of ice and water. But you can't do that homogeneously. There has to actually be some surface that the water then attaches to. And so that process of attaching, of moisture in the atmosphere attaching to a surface, that surface is the nucleation or the seeding, the seed of the cloud that you see.
Okay, that's interesting. See, I just thought clouds were just water, but there's more up there than just vapor.
Yeah. It's very different. You have to, the levels of supersaturation that you have to reach in order for water just to condense out of the gas phase don't occur in our atmosphere. And so you have to, but you can destabilize that by having something for the water to condense on at a certain temperature.
Okay. I have two questions here. I would encourage you all to ask questions. If we can answer them, we will. If not, then we'll come back to it at some point, or we'll follow up. And then I'm going to show some pictures from the first part of my interview, because it shows you guys out at sea collecting your samples. This question is from Engineering Cannabis, and he says, Dr. Vernon, in dealing with a volatile and dynamic systems, what models do you think represent climate systems effectively, statistical models or new machine learning models?
So my answer is, right now, if it's a volatile and dynamic system, statistical models aren't going to work. Statistical models work primarily for systems that are slowly varying, or persistence modeling. Right? You know what's going. You know what the climate is in a certain region. You take a catalog of past data, you synthesize an equation, and based on the statistics, and then you predict what the future is. But your assumption is past will determine the future. As you have read or seen, climate is becoming more and more volatile, more and more erratic year by year. So statistical models are doing worse and worse. Machine learning models could be the future, but you tend to train machine learning models on data that you've collected. And so if your data is highly variable, it's tough to really train a machine learning model or AI model. Although you can analyze data and do pattern recognition and analysis well with that. So which type of model? Numerical models are actually the best thing out there right now. So deterministic models that are based not on past behavior and not on solely on the training of models on an existing data set, but on deterministic equations. So,
okay. This question, I'm going to ask this question, or I'm going to present this question. I'm going to pull up the first part of our interview. This one says, I can't imagine how many pieces of equipment you use, but what equipment do you need? What equipment do you need to submit a proposal, if you don't mind asking? I mean, well, let's take a look at some of the stuff you used out on one of your cruises.
Yeah, I don't mind any questions. Any questions are fair. If you're talking about the proposal that I'm writing right now to look at microbes in the upper atmosphere, we're actually trying to build a new piece of equipment to do that. Currently there is no instrument that allows you to measure the viability of an airborne microbe in situ. I can take a filter, then bring it down to the lab, and then I can test. But once I bring it down to the lab and try to grow it or do anything, I'm creating a new environment. That's not the environment that I captured it in. So if I want to know what is at 30,000 feet or at 50,000 feet, I want to know what microbes are there and what are they doing. I've got to measure it there. And right now, nothing exists that I can do that. So we're designing, the proposal is actually to build a new type of instrument, attach it to a drifting balloon that will drift at particular heights in the atmosphere for up to 3 months at a time, and do the measurements in situ, and then relay the information back down by radio transmitter so that we can see it on the ground. So one of the cool things about science for me is not only can I ask questions that no one has answered yet, but I get to develop techniques and instrumentation that no one has developed yet, which I get a kick out of personally. It makes me happy to even think about it.
Okay. Everyone, if you want to make a donation to the channel, my Cash App and PayPal are there. I don't have super chat capabilities yet. Vernon, in this picture right here, what is that you're doing? And what's that your...
So that is a radiometer that I'm cleaning off. Looks like there's looks like there's a temperature gauge or something like that over my shoulder. But what I'm cleaning off is a radiometer. So that's a device that measures downwelling radiation. And this one is a hemispherical one. So it's measuring, radiation, all radiation that's downwelling, coming down from the atmosphere in a hemispherical way that we measure as a function of time. So regardless of where the sun is, you're getting downwelling radiation that's coming because of scattering in the atmosphere or direct radiation. And the information that you get from that, you can invert in such a way that you know what's in the atmosphere, because we know what wavelengths the sun is emitting. And so the sun emits across a broad spectrum of wavelengths. If there's nothing in between me and the sun, and I have a device that's measuring radiation, then I'm directly measuring the sun. What I see in terms of the spectrum on my spectrometer or on my radiometer is directly reflective of the sun. But if I start to attenuate certain wavelengths because I have ozone in the way, or I have particles of a particular type in the way, or nitrogen dioxide, or some suite of absorbers or scatterers, then what I get at the knowing what the sun is emitting and understanding what I'm measuring allows me to invert the information in such a way that I now know what's in the atmosphere between myself and the sun. And so this is critical, because if I'm looking at a dust storm that's passing overhead and I want to know what the chemistry is, this is one of the pieces of instrumentation that allows me to understand how the physics is changing because of what's between myself and that radiation source, and how the chemistry is changing basically the energy that's coming from the sun. So climate is all about how the energy of the Earth system changes in time and space. The energy is the energy from the sun. And so the energy from the sun comes down, it heats the atmosphere, it heats the Earth, and then it re-emits, and you reach some sort of equilibrium. And as long as you stay in that equilibrium, you've got a stable climate state. But when that equilibrium starts changing rapidly, you get climate change. And so right now we're in a regime where that energy balance is changing rapidly and unevenly because of what we're doing on different parts of the Earth system and changing the Earth's surface and putting into the atmosphere. And so typically what you do is you have surface systems that are measuring the energy balance in the atmosphere, and that allows you to understand climate changes and climate stasis.
Okay, so everyone, just as you're listening to this, keep in mind that Dr. Morris has a background in chemistry, right? But also there's a lot of physics interwoven into the things he's talking about.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things, even in the biological sciences, chemistry and physics, they come in somewhere. Snuggles says, what I'm learning is that we live in H2O in either a solid, liquid, or gas form. All beings on this planet, we are literally walking through H2O on land and the ocean. It's dense. That's why we swim in it. Okay, interesting. Well, yeah. The Earth, out of all the planets in our solar system, the Earth has very, very unique properties that allow life. I'll just keep that there.
Yeah, the presence of water in all of its phases is really unique. Earth is one of the few planets that you have water in all three phases. And yes, there's as organisms, humans are predominantly, 60% water. The Earth is covered with at least, 60% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. There's water vapor just about everywhere, different amounts, but everywhere. And then there's solid water in certain spaces, certainly at the poles, high in the atmosphere.
Okay. Past the $40 says, and I intentionally scrolled to this picture, why did they not use the balloon technique? It looks like they did.
Oh, we do. We invest in soundings, which are the devices that we attach to balloons. But a typical weather balloon is not retrievable, right? You release it, it goes up, it bursts, it drops its package somewhere on the Earth's surface, and it's done. There's no more data there. And it typically lasts 3 hours tops. And it doesn't stay at the same altitude. It gives you a profile of the atmosphere. And this is important. And that information is important, but it serves a specific purpose and answers a specific suite of questions, or contributes to the answers for a specific suite of questions. But yeah, we launch balloons on the ship, balloon-borne instruments on the ship, about every 6 hours. Every day, every 6 hours. So we have a nice complete profile of the vertical structure of the atmosphere every day. And then we have some special devices that we put on that give us some chemical profiles of ozone. But it's limited on what those give you. And again, if you wanted to know what's happening at a particular altitude, you've got to use a different type of device and balloon. And then you got to worry about your power supply, right? How do I power something for 3 months if it's up on a balloon at 50,000 feet, right? That's an engineering challenge, not unsolvable. We think we know how to do it, but that's very different from saying, I'm going to put something on a balloon, it's going to go up for about 3 hours and then be done. I can use batteries for that. No problem. We do use batteries for that.
Okay. One last question, then we'll move on because we're right at an hour. In this picture right here, what are you guys measuring right here?
So I bring a mobile lab on the ship. So the ship, I might add, is not small, but it's not huge. So if you think research ship and you think of a cruise, Princess Cruise Lines or something like that, when we pull up along a cruise ship, it's like pulling up like a kiddie car. Those cars for like 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds. They have a little, Barbie car. Mm-hmm. If you pull that up alongside a train car, that's about the relative size. Like if you have 4 or 5 different train cars, our ship is, our ship is to a cruise liner as, a kiddie car is to several train cars. It's big difference. But it is equipped with a lab in it, and it is large enough for us to put on mobile labs. So we have a 20-foot trailer that we've converted into a mobile lab. That's me and a student inside of that lab on the deck of the ship. And you see basically a battery of aerosol instruments there that are sampling from the atmosphere, from the mast, pulling in air, and then giving us real-time readouts of the particle characteristics during a dust storm.
Okay. All right, everyone. Again, this image is from the first part 1 of my interview with Dr. Morris that I wrote up a couple of years ago. That's below the stream. If you're new coming in, please hit the like. If you want to make a donation to the channel, my Cash App and PayPal are there. So, Dr. Morris, now you're at Arizona State University, and you are a senior sustainability scientist. I'm unfamiliar with sustainability science. Can you talk about that field and what that is?
Yeah, it's well, the title has changed. So it used to be, and this is within Arizona State. So the School of Sustainability resides in the College of Global Futures. And what they've done, moved away from the sustainability language to global futures language, which I think is a little bit better. And so it's, they sent an email recently saying, change your title, take off senior sustainability scientist to senior global futures scientist. But really what they're talking about is, how do we envision living on a planet that is rapidly evolving, and a large part of that is due to human evolution. both in terms of the technologies we have, in terms of industrialization, in terms of the way that we interact with each other, certainly the way that we interact with the planetary system. And so it's as these technologies develop that allow us to live in the system that we're perturbing, that we're changing, we have to be more aware of our impact, not just on the planet and that feedback effect on us, but on each other. And that hasn't been the focus of industrialization ever, right? And you think about the Industrial Revolution, no one was thinking about, well, who's left out of this? And who's going to suffer because we're industrializing this way? And what are the effects on the planet if we start to burn all the fossil fuel? Nobody thought about that. And so sustainability or global futures is about designing for the future with a lens towards sustaining life for everybody in an equitable way. And the way I look at it, a lot of times it's about technology. We could do this technology, we'll do that technology, we'll just terraform the earth, we'll just mine the ocean floors, we'll just do this, new technologies to find new energy without being too damaging has sort of been a short-sighted way of thinking about sustainability. I don't want to kill anybody, but I want to extend livelihoods. And a lot of times it's driven by a lot of capital, big capital interests. And it's driven by how much money can I make off of this? It's driven by a very extractive view of how you manipulate Earth's resources to advance living in the Earth system. And what I hope, one of the things that I bring to this this unit is that we change our framing of that, from a transactional framing, from an extractive framing to a more relational and restorative framing. How do we live? We're part of the Earth system. And a large part of our development of technology, even now, is that we sit outside the Earth system. We live on the planet Earth, right? As if it's an Earth system. We live inside the system because we're part of the system. And so I think changing the way we as technologists, as scientists, as engineers, think about ourselves as part of the system, then we can start to think about solutions that are more inclusive. Right? Electric cars, for example, great, but if they're expensive, then you've got a large class of people who can't participate in that economy. Internet is great, but we don't make it free, so everybody doesn't have it. So it's a great technology, an equalizing technology, but it's only equalizing for the people who have access to it. If you don't have access to it, it's really unequal. Green technologies we talk about all the time. Well, how green is the technology if the technology is based on a limited, element that's in the Congo, in a conflict region? And so because that's a U.S. interest for us to get to it, we're going to make sure that it stays a conflict region so we can pull out those minerals and make these batteries that we need for our solar panels. Well, that's green in one sense, and it's inhumane in another. And that's not, in my mind, that's not sustainable. And for us to get to a point where we're not folding into technology imperialist concerns and drivers, that's the type of global future that I would like to see. And so sustainability science or global future science is really imagining the world operating in a different way and engaging science and technology in ways that are more inclusive, and that are less, in certain ways, less capitalist, but more human. It's more human-centered, more equity-centered. How do we all, everybody on the planet, benefit from science and technology?
Okay, so it sounds like I have a couple comments here in the chat. If you guys have any more questions or comments, go ahead and put those in, because I'm at the end. I'm almost at the end of my questions. But it sounds like you're saying that right now, decisions in terms of the private sector, maybe government policy, are being made with dollars in mind first.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to how can we create new technologies and preserve the earth as well, and also so that the masses can benefit as opposed to just a minority of people.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's global futures.
That's global futures. Yeah, is
Okay.
one thinking about the future of the planet as a system in which we're all part of, versus thinking about the future in terms of what technologies allow the elite to continue to make money and preserve their self-interest.
Okay.
And yeah, technology is commodified. We know this. Communications, information, all of it's commodified. And ideally, you don't pay for water, right? Like fresh water, you should be able to get. But fresh water is not a right there is no right to fresh water, clean water in the United States. Some countries do have this in law. Every person in this country has a right to, when they turn open their tap, that water is clean. It will not kill them. Quite literally, we have states, we have cities like Flint, but unfortunately, Flint is not unique, where open the tap water, you can't drink from that. It's poison. Right? So Global Futures is saying, what do we need to do in terms of science and technology to make that not our reality? And we're not going to do it in such a way that it makes somebody rich. We're going to do it because that's what we should be about. We should be about everybody living an equitable, existence. I can live without poisoning myself. Right? I don't have to starve to death. Like, why are people starving in the United States? That's a grand challenge. Why are people starving anywhere? Famine is man-made, right? There are no natural famines. They're politically driven. And so it's these, expansion of the desert, pollution of the ocean. These are things that we're going in one direction because capital interests are served by going in that direction. And so that's our future. And global futures or sustainability is changing that trajectory, but hopefully changing it in a way that everyone benefits. Not, again, you can change it and then you'll just have a new set of technocrats who benefit, a new set of capitalists who benefit. That's not the answer ultimately.
Okay. So it definitely sounds like there's a level of consciousness to this.
Yeah.
There's a level of ethics that we normally don't associate with the private sector. The private sector is thought to be profit-based, the bottom line. I can hear a lot of consciousness and ethics in this. Okay.
And in the science and technology sector, because the science and technology sector presume itself to be completely objective. But it's not. It's made up of humans who have capital interests, who have class interests, who have racialized interests. And those affect the types of solutions that we pursue. And so this is an opportunity. It's not fully realized, but it's an opportunity to change that. So it's one of the things that excited me about coming to Arizona State, to tell you the truth.
Okay. Yeah, this sounds vastly different than serving as the chair of the chemistry department at Howard. This is like galaxies away from that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read some of these comments. Folks, if you're new coming in, please hit the like. If you want to make a donation, I'll put my Cash App and PayPal in there probably one more time. I don't have a super chat enabled here yet. Let's see. Diaspora L says sustainability is really huge at ASU. Pastor $40 says, is sustainability more science or political in your view?
You ask good questions.
He tends to Yeah.
Your questions don't have, your questions don't have binary answers. Science is political. Okay. Science is highly politicized. Ask any, should we mask or not? There's a scientific answer for that. It is highly politicized currently. So sustainability is highly political, and it's also should be grounded in science. And what we're trying to do, in fact, anything having to do with resources is political. And so for us to have solutions that make the natural resources of the Earth system equitably apportioned, it's absolutely political. But there is a scientific solution, an engineering solution to getting there. So it's both.
Okay. Diaspora L says the social component is just as prominent as the science component, which is the second and third bottom line. The first bottom line being, as Dr. Morris is hinting to, money, all consequently improving to the Earth.
I would say ostensibly improving, but if dollars are your bottom line, if dollars are your first bottom line, you're not going to serve those other bottom line. Dollars can't be the first bottom line, and ultimately, it's just the way it is.
Pastor $40 says informative and great stream. He says, can we promise a limited resource? This is an interesting conversation. I think he's thinking about water. I think he's talking about water there.
Well, yeah, I think, can you promise? It's good, again, great question. Again, a great question. But water is a cyclic resource, right? So the answer is yes. We waste and consume far more than we need. And so if I could reframe the question, is there enough water for the global population? Is there enough clean water for the global population? Do we have the ability to provide clean water to the current and future global population? The answer is absolutely yes. But not the way that we're doing it now, not the way that we manage now, not the way that we waste now.
Okay. We have another question from Engineering Cannabis. He says, Dr. Vernon, with numerical models for a huge system, there are a couple of challenges such as processing speed and efficiency of models. What are your thoughts and your thoughts on also deep learning models?
So, yeah, I talked a little bit about this. I think there's a lot of potential for that, and what I didn't mention is you can get, by using ensembles of models and looking at ensemble behavior, you can reduce some of the computational expense. But yes, as the models become more complex, as we try to improve resolution on time scales or spatial scales, which is where we need to go for a number of these, you do have a lot more computational expense, and we have to figure out how can we get around that. I think one innovative way are programming chips, right? So you've got a multiprocessor node. You can actually put the numerical models, climate models, on chips that go in versus trying to write a program that's going to use the whole architecture. And some of these, I think, can reduce the immediate computational expense. But I think we've also got to be more creative with our models numerically and mathematically. We're still programming in ways for the large numerical models that we were programming. A lot of the backbones are still Fortran, for example. I don't know how many people out there still know what Fortran is, but if you're a graybeard like me, you programmed in Fortran. There was no C, there was no Python, there was no R. You wrote the codes line by line. I think we're due for some innovation in computer science programming that can also help reduce computational expense, both computer engineering and computer science programming. Because you can't just go out and build a bigger machine every time your model outpaces the capacity that you have, the memory capacity or the speed that you need.
Okay, I'll do the remain. We'll do the remainder of these really quickly because we're almost at an hour and a half. Snuggle says, so science is determined to be true or false, depends on the money backed by it. Sir,
no.
I would say, Dr. Morris, would you say the interpretation or the conclusions that shape public policy can impact what results are disseminated?
Yeah, so that's the political side. So you want to separate there is political science and there is policy based on science, and there's public interpretation, political interpretation. So if I go out and I measure gravity, right, and I say that the gravitational acceleration on Earth is greater than it is on Mars. Scientific fact. That does not depend on the money that it's backed by. Now, for me to go out and take some measurements, it takes money to do science, yes, but the veracity of the science is based on, the experiment, the, application of physical laws or mathematics, etc. But we can interpret the impact or the outcomes in a variety of different ways. And so I wouldn't say that the veracity, true or false, of science depends on the money it's backed by, but certainly the applications, the outcome, the interpretations, those are politicized. And money is one of the resources that politics is based on.
Okay. This should be a quickie. Why does no one want to use steam energy? I think at one point the societies did.
Yeah. They did.
But there are other more robust methods of energy production now. So I don't know how prevalent that is anymore. Pastor $40 says, thank you for answering my questions as well. Real down to earth fellas. Thank you. And then Diaspora L says, wow, if science is political and if both politics and economics is a subsect of the sociology construct, then what does that tell you? Sustainability by definition is going back to 1994 was the triple bottom line, which even its definition has evolved from. That was a mouthful. Okay. Yeah. So, Vernon,
it tells you that scientists are human. People are political animals. So, yeah, scientists are human too.
Okay. So this one you can answer in as much detail, or you can keep it as high level as you want. But many people don't understand the variability in environments across higher education. In as much detail as you want to get into, how are the environments different as a faculty member at Arizona State University versus at Howard? And as much or as little detail as you want to get into.
We might have to do another hour and a half.
All right, just some basics. I mean,
I think there is a lot of difference. One is a public institution, one's a private institution. And so if you're a private institution, you are constantly trying to raise money because you don't have a set budget from the local municipality, the state, etc. And so the focus on financial fundraising and philanthropy is or needs to be extremely different in those cases. Now, I say that, and then being at Arizona State, only less than 20% of ASU's budget comes from the state. Because if you are dependent upon a state budget or on a city budget or what have you, if there's any economic fluctuations or political, someone says, well, I don't think education is important, then you can really suffer rapidly. And so your stability is at risk if you have too much of a dependence on any single revenue stream. So I think that philanthropy, sort of entrepreneurship, at ASU is really unique among public institutions and should be a model for some of the private institutions. But what private institutions tend to do is restrict enrollment, drive up, fees, tuition costs, etc., and that, they pump that revenue stream as their core stream and then try to raise money on the side. And when they do that, they're always at a tenuous point, because if someone says, I don't want to pay that money, then you can't make your bottom line anymore, right? You can't, make ends meet because you don't have the revenue stream that you depend on for operations. So that's one thing. It's just the fundraising things are very different. HBCUs were federally mandated. That came out of the two acts called Morrill Acts. You might want to look those up. But those are controversial because what they did was they basically stole or took unceded Native American land and said, we're doing good though, and we're going to educate Black people. But the way that they went about the structuring of those institutions, we still feel in those institutions because it limits how they operate, how their leadership develops, and how much resources that they have. So there's a big resource difference between an HBCU and a historically white university. Minority serving institutions is another designation. That's a federal designation. Looking at the demographics of the United States, every school in the United States, we're on track for the majority of institutions in the United States becoming MSIs based on the federal designation as it stands today, because the number of people who identify with racialized groups in the United States is going to cross 50% pretty soon. If that is reflected in enrollments, everybody's an MSI. But
it stands for
minority serving institution.
Okay.
And so you have historically Black colleges and universities, which were federally mandated to serve a particular population. But you have minority serving institutions who by chance are serving, say, a lot of, UTEP serves more Chicano, Latin American, Latinx students than white students, because of the population of where they are. So you have, institutions of higher learning that are serving populations that are traditionally excluded from your Ivy Leagues and from a lot of your elite schools, but they tend to be less resourced than the elite schools. So the resource issue there is major. I think the political environment, Washington, D.C. is a great place to live. I love it there. Loved it there. I don't live there now. Miss it. But it's a unique political environment. And a lot of places are not as diverse intellectually when it comes to politics, and the schools, academic institutions have to navigate the political environment where they sit. And you can see the attacks on a lot of the schools right now because they may sit in a very conservative place or a place Arizona values individualism. Okay. So it's a colorblind state, and colorblind policies entrench racism because it says, don't talk about race. Wow. So you tell me if there's a problem that you can't solve or a challenge that you can overcome if you can't talk about it. I'll leave that out there. But so these are things that the, academic institutions have to address. It's very different. That's a very different thing. I think Arizona State, again, I love the charter. I love what they're doing in order to navigate this political space, but it's a very different kabuki dance than Howard has to do in Washington, D.C. Now, Howard has to do its own sort of dance to get the federal appropriation. And so they can't be too radical because, that may jeopardize, or there's a fear that jeopardizes this core money that comes in that allows them to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And a lot of HBCUs have to do that dance, where I think they could be these beautiful, hotbeds of feminist thought, of Black radical thought, of really transformative intellectual growth. But if you're an administrator there, a higher administrator, you're looking and saying, okay, I don't want to turn the Koch brothers' money away, because Koch brothers is going to give me $50 million and I need $50 million. So I'm going to, shut down that group over there so they can't make too many waves, and I can get this Koch brothers money, or I can get this Monsanto money, or I can get, this, Walton family money, or what have you. And so, those concerns are very different and depend a lot on the political environments that a lot of the schools sit in. HBCUs tend to be all in the South. South tends to be a little more conservative. A lot of them are associated with churches. And so there's a religious tradition or a framing of a lot of things. And that's different, from a state school, like Arizona State or Michigan.
Yep.
Where, praying at ceremonies at the school is probably unheard of in a state school. But opening a ceremony with prayer at an HBCU, not doing it is almost unheard of. Like, the chaplain is going to come and open the ceremony. They're going to pray before the meal or before the food is, and so there are very different traditions there. I think all of them are valuable and rich. But differences, there's a lot. And like I said, that's like, it'd be a beautiful panel to have of a couple of folks from small HBCUs, larger HBCUs, research HBCUs, and then maybe some other institutions, just to talk about a few, points of variance and how it's dealt with. The experience of a Black faculty at an HBCU versus the experience of a Black faculty at a majority institution, especially a huge one like ASU, man, complete worlds apart.
Mm-hmm.
Worlds apart. Aside from just being a faculty at, the resources at ASU are incredible. Every day I'm like, wow, I didn't know I didn't have to do that. I can just call up somebody and they'll do that for me.
But I think you told me there's a tremendous private sector collaboration there. Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. It's huge. Yeah. There's so many companies that have, facilities on campus or building facilities on campus. Zoom is on the ASU campus. When I have a problem with Zoom, I call the Zoom, fast response team. It is, Zoom employees who respond to me and say, oh, we can work that out. If I were at Howard and call Zoom, I get put on hold and I'm waiting for the, it's very different. That's just, it's hard to equate those things.
Okay.
But the resources, that's part of the inequity in the academy, is that there's a lot of information behind paywalls that HBCUs can't access because they're just trying to make trying to make payroll. They're trying to make ends meet financially. And so paying for subscriptions that give you access to every journal all the time, that's out. That's not possible. And so if I'm a researcher there trying to work on something that's cutting edge, and I'm a researcher at ASU doing the same thing, I've got access to all kinds of information.
Yep.
And information's power. Whereas I'm cut off from that information. I'm trying to find a way to get it. And that shows when you start trying to write proposals or try to publish papers or start collaborations, et cetera. And there's a lot of gymnastics that you have to do to stay viable as a researcher at an HBCU that are really time consuming and exhausting in certain ways that you just don't have to at a lot of majority institutions. And that's something that has to change. That's an example of a global future that I would like to see, make the journals open access, make information, if it's truly an egalitarian scientific community, then we're not hiding any information from any other scientists. It's out there. Here you go. Right. But that's not the reality right now.
Okay.
But we can talk about you can't overcome that as an HBCU faculty, and I figured out ways to do that, but it's not available everywhere, and you have to be really intentional about that.
Okay. Well, Vernon, thank you. I've learned a lot from this that I didn't know going in. Those are all the questions I have. Do you have any parting words or comments?
No, there's so much on my mind, and get all these bottomless questions from your.
They get creative. They get creative.
Yeah. No, I think thanks is one. Thank you for inviting me onto this show, this venue. It's very nice. Thanks for the questions. I really like the questions. Make me think. I'd love to share more. As I said, I come back. I came into the other. I think I come into the Facebook side. I haven't been on this side.
Okay. I might have. Yeah, I think I was talking with Nicole Ali, and I think I saw you pass through the chat. So, yeah. Okay.
But yeah, thanks, and I hope everybody stays safe and sane during this wild time, and keep asking questions. I mean, that's the thing, is to stay, follow your curiosity and your inquisitiveness and sort of critical examination of what you see out there. It's important to ask questions, but it's also important to know that science is not, science can be politicized, but the scientific facts themselves are the things that we have to rely on for survival. I mean, if you're relying on scientific facts when you jump in your car and drive, or jump in the bus, or jump on the train, or I don't know how many things, turn on the stove and cook, you're relying on science all the time. So science is not arbitrary, right? It is not, scientific facts are not arbitrary, not at all.
Okay. Well, I'm going to end this. We mentioned Percy Julian earlier, and I just want to end this with these science topics, these facts, these things, they reach out beyond the scientific arena. So if you think about Percy Julian, and I would encourage everyone who's watching this live stream or watching on the playback, go get a copy of Forgotten Genius. His ideas impacted, he was a chemist, a bit of a plant scientist. His knowledge and intellect and his ideas impacted the medical field. He made arthritis medication and hormone therapies more affordable for everybody. So his scientific ideas, his scientific expertise, that impacted the medical field, and it impacted the business world. So that's why we kind of ended here talking about public policy, business, ethics. These things reach out beyond the textbooks and the research. I know it gets a little esoteric for the non-science people, but I want to, on this channel, I want to start to communicate how these things impact everything and everyone. So I think we'll stop there. So everyone, thank you for watching this discussion with Dr. Vernon Morris. Vernon, I hope to have you back sometime. And if you're watching on the playback and you want to make a donation to the channel, my PayPal and Cash App are below. Also, my print interviews with Dr. Morris are below as well. There we talk about his path, how he became interested in science, and how he trained in science. And I think that's important, particularly if you know a young person or young people in your circle who have shown the aptitude for this. Oftentimes it's finding a mentor or finding the right mentor to kind of say, you need to go get involved in this program, you need to go in that direction. And we also talked about what STEM education is like in the inner cities. So all that's below this stream. And I'm also going to leave this article here that Dr. Morris shared. I'm going to show it to everyone this will be beneath this playback as well. Yeah, that's going to be below.
Oh.
Okay. So with that, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you for watching. Expect more discussions like this here. Besides the aside from the individual content that I myself create. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday, everyone. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and we'll talk to you the next time.
All right. Yeah.